Glasgow, though, as I say, is quite a bit bigger, quite considerably bigger than Edinburgh, and that's really mostly been down to the last 250 years or so, which was a very heavily industrial period in Scotland, round about the end. And here in Scotland, Glasgow was one of the main cities that sort of burgeoned and grew out of this industrial revolution. Prior to that, Glasgow was a fairly small place, a fairly unimportant little township out on the western side of Scotland. But its origins do go back, way back to the 4th century. People started to settle. Way back in the 4th century, down here in Glasgow and down by the river, which is called the River Clyde, which we're going to pass over in just a couple of minutes' time. But it was a fairly small place. It was a fairly unimportant little township, but it did start to grow in size a little bit. A few different little events happened during the course of the next few hundred years. In the 1200s, for instance, Glasgow got its cathedral. Glasgow Cathedral is towards the opposite side of the city that we're leaving today. It was first built back in the 1200s. A couple of hundred years later, in the 1400s, 1451 to be precise, we had the opening of Glasgow University. And Glasgow University is up towards the northern western side of the city. And it's still teaching today, one of the oldest universities in the whole world that is still teaching today. Beautiful big buildings, beautiful landscape all round about it, big gardens and parkland and things. So Glasgow was beginning to grow in size, but it never really sort of caught on properly until this new land had been discovered across the Atlantic Ocean of the Americas. Now, some history books will tell us that back in the late 1400s, Christopher Columbus discovered America. However, whatever it was, this new land had been not discovered, but because people were already there, but it had been rediscovered, shall we say. And people from various European countries started to travel out towards this new land. People from the likes of Scotland here, and England, and France, and Spain, and the Netherlands, and various different European countries. So the colonies started to form, particularly on the eastern side of America. And Glasgow now found itself to be in a fantastic position, based out on the western side of Scotland. A nice big deep river coming in to the town, and Glasgow started to establish itself as one of the main ports for trade coming back and forward across the Atlantic. And the trade was in such things as tobacco, cotton, sugar, even things like opium, and even elements that we're not too particularly proud of, things like the slave trade as well. So there was a huge amount of trade and a huge amount of big ships and boats coming up and down the River Clyde, huge amount of money starting to circle around in Glasgow. Glasgow became a very, very prosperous little town as we moved through the 1600s and into the early to mid 1700s. Glasgow was very, very prosperous, and it was all to do with the river. So if you look down underneath us here, this is the River Clyde. That's directly down underneath us, and the River Clyde very much at the heart of many of the different periods of history that Glasgow has went through, but this period in particular that I'm talking about, to do with trade, very much at the forefront. Now, these days, down around about the River Clyde, you will find riverside apartments, restaurants, bars, cinema complexes, big rock venues, rock concert venues, various museums and things like that. So it's very much about leisure and pleasure these days, but as I say,